Hey, middle school family, let's jump right back into it and let's learn about the end of World War I. So the question is, what country is to blame for the start of World War I? Well, like most things, it probably kind of depends on who you ask. I mean, Austria-Hungary was the first country to declare war, but Germany was the first to strike. I would say that pretty much all of the Allied powers would blame Germany for the war. And you'll see how Germany ends up being punished for starting the war, which is going to lead to a series of events that will propel us into World War II. In March 1918, the Germans mounted one final, massive attack on the Allies in France. As in the opening weeks of the war, the German forces crushed everything in their path. By late May 1918, the Germans had again reached the Marne River. Paris was less than 40 miles away, and victory seemed within reach. By this time, however, the German military had weakened. The effort to reach the Marne had exhausted the men and their supplies. Now, sensing this weakness, the Allies, with the aid of nearly 140,000 fresh U.S. troops, launched a counterattack. And in July 1918, the Allies and the Germans clashed at the Second Battle of the Marne. Leading the Allied attack were some 350 tanks that rumbled slowly forward, smashing through the German lines. With the arrival of 2 million more American troops, the Allied forces began to advance steadily toward Germany. Soon, the Central Powers began to crumble. First the Bulgarians, and then the Ottoman Turks surrendered. In October, revolution swept through Austria-Hungary. In Germany, soldiers mutinied and the public turned on the Kaiser. On November 9th, 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II stepped down. Do you know what the Kaiser is? He's kind of like the ruler of Germany. A representative of the new German government met with French commander Marshal Foch in a railway car near Paris. The two signed an armistice, or an agreement to stop fighting. On November 11th, World War I came to an end. Despite representatives from numerous countries, the meeting's major decisions were hammered out by a group known as the Big Four: Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Georges Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, and Vittorio Orlando of Italy. Now, Russia was not included in this meeting because they were in the middle of a civil war, and Germany and its allies were also not invited. Awkward. On January 1918, even before World War I ended, President Wilson had drawn up a series of peace proposals. He called them the 14 Points. They outlined a plan for achieving a just and lasting peace. The treaty addressed, among other things, the main causes of World War I. Remember Maine, M-A-I-N? It addressed militarism, by limiting weapons and militaries of nations. It placed an end to all secret alliances. It addressed imperialism by self-determination, that is, colonial lands under control of European nations, that they would be able to decide for themselves under which government they wanted to live. So remember, all of these European countries had all of these colonies that they had established in the Americas, in Africa, in Australia. And so one of President Wilson's 14 points was that the colonies would now be able to decide for themselves which nation would govern them. Would it be the nation that they are currently living in? Would it be the nation that they were colonized by? The first 4 points included an end to secret treaties, freedom of the seas, free trade, and reduced national armies and navies. The fifth goal was the adjustment of colonial claims with fairness toward those colonial people that we were just talking about. Now, the 6th through the 13th points were specific suggestions for changing borders and creating new nations. The guiding idea behind these points was self-determination. What does self-determination mean? It means allowing people to decide for themselves under what government they wish to live. And then finally, the 14th point proposed a general association of nations that would protect great and small states alike. This reflected Wilson's hope for an organization that could peacefully negotiate solutions to world conflicts. When the Paris Peace Conference opened, Britain and France showed little sign of agreeing to Wilson's 14 points. They were concerned with national security. They also wanted to strip Germany of its war-making power. These differences in French, British, and U.S. aims led to heated debates. But finally, a compromise was reached. The Treaty of Versailles between Germany and the Allied powers was signed on June 28, 1919, which coincidentally was 5 years to the day after Franz Ferdinand's assassination in Sarajevo. So 5 years to the day after he was assassinated, after the spark that started World War I, 5 years to the day, the Treaty of Versailles was signed. Adopting Wilson's 14th point, the treaty created a League of Nations. The League was to be an international association whose goal would be to keep peace among nations. However, the treaty also punished Germany. The defeated nation lost much of its territory and restricted its military operations. As tough as these provisions were, the harshest was Article 231. It was also known as the War Guilt Clause. It placed sole responsibility for the war on Germany's shoulders, and as a result, Germany had to pay reparations to the Allies. What are reparations? Have you heard of that? Have you ever heard of people saying that they should be paid reparations? Those are payments, like money payments, monetary payments for damages. And in this case, it's payments for war damages. So Germany has to pay the other countries for the war damages. And not only that, but all of Germany's territories in Africa and the Pacific were declared mandates or territories to be administered by the League of Nations. Under this peace agreement, the Allies would govern the mandates until they were judged ready for independence. Now, the Germans signed because they had no choice. They were kind of over a barrel. They really didn't have any way out of this, but it made them so resentful. Their resentment of the Treaty of Versailles would brew and grow for the next 20 years, leading to the rise of a leader who promised Germans a return to the German Empire's greatness. He would defy the treaty, challenging the war, challenging the world. And for a while, he would win, resulting in an even larger world war.
World War I leads to World War II as day follows night. By the end of World War I, everybody is looking to get advantage.
World War I didn't really end in 1918. It brutalized an entire generation of Europeans. It brutalized an entire generation of people around the world. And it made them realize that war on this scale was not only possible, but actually thinkable.
There's a wonderful, wonderful political cartoon where the fat politicians and generals are walking out of Versailles, and there's a little tiny boy and he's crying in the corner. And I'm not kidding, he says, "I'm cannon fodder for 1940. They knew, anyone with half a brain knew that the Treaty of Versailles was essentially the starting gun for the Second World War.
Essentially what happened is that you create such an unstable economy and so much animosity between nations that you're just seeding the field of war to rise and grow again.
A lot of the anger, animosity, resentment that fuels the rise of the National Socialists of Adolf Hitler in Germany can be directly tied to that. It would be difficult to argue that that's simply propaganda that's utilized by Adolf Hitler. These were very difficult terms for the German people to handle. And it creates this bunker mentality, this us against the world mentality that ultimately will play out in Hitler being able to create a program that appeals to that sentiment.
To the average German, they have been sold out by the politicians.
In particular, it made people like Adolf Hitler, who had fought, after all, in the German army in World War I, think that if only the Germans could do it again, but do it right this time, they could actually win.
We call it World War I, World War II, but it's really two different stages of one global conflict. It just happens that people put their arms down for a 20-year period, and then they went back to fighting again.
Take a minute and look at the map. Look at Europe before the war. You can see where the boundaries were for the different countries. And then look at Europe after the war. Look at the huge changes that were made after the war. And you can see how Germany felt resentment about their loss because the Treaty of Versailles left them weak, which is what laid the groundwork for Nazism, which really led to World War II, which we will learn more about next year in 8th grade in World History. All right, so please use this video and the information in the handout, Hitler and the Treaty of Versailles, which is also attached on the website. I love you guys very much. Have a wonderful Tuesday.